I thought I was running a business with my wife. Turns out, I was financing my own downfall. When the detectives showed up at my office with questions about illegal transfers I'd never approved, I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a setup, and the people behind it were a lot closer than I ever imagined. The morning started like any other: coffee by 7, inbox by 7:15, team check-in by 9. At Langston Systems, routine was sacred. I handled operations, infrastructure, and contracts. Valerie, my wife of 11 years, managed finance and admin. She always had a head for numbers, and I trusted her implicitly. We'd started this company together from a 2-room rented office and turned it into a firm with 16 employees and contracts across 3 states. We were the picture of the modern entrepreneurial couple. At least, that's what I thought. When the 2 men in suits showed up that Wednesday, I figured they were clients. I shook their hands, offered coffee. Then one of them pulled out a badge. Detective Alan Morales, Financial Crimes Division. We have some questions about irregular transfers made from Langston Systems' business account. It took me a second to process the words. Transfers? What transfers? He pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. Inside were printed screenshots of wire transfers. Large sums. Each one allegedly authorized by me. My name. My digital signature. My approval code. But I hadn't made any of them. I flipped through, heart rate rising. These aren't mine. I've never seen these. Morales studied my face carefully. Your name is on each approval log. But I didn't sign these. I insisted. I don't even handle payments over $10,000. Valerie does. My wife. Yes, he said calmly. We know. But every one of these went through your ID. How much money are we talking about? I asked. Just over $270,000, he replied. My stomach dropped. I don't remember what I said after that. Something defensive. Something about internal miscommunication. Morales wasn't hostile, but he was sharp. He asked me not to discuss the matter with anyone yet, especially not my staff. They left politely. I closed the door and locked it. And then I sat down in the chair and just stared at the wall. Either someone had hacked into our system, or someone with access had faked my approvals. And there were only 2 people with that kind of access, me and Valerie. At first, I didn't want to believe it. Valerie and I weren't perfect, but we worked well together. She was sharp, organized, charming in meetings. We'd had some rocky patches, mostly about stress, long hours, how much she'd been working late over the last 6 months. But nothing serious. Nothing criminal, right? I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I called someone I trusted, Chris Patel, our lead IT specialist. Chris, I said, I need a full access log audit from the past 12 months. Focus on approval requests, login activity, IP addresses, everything. Don't ask why. Just pull it. Quietly. He was confused, but he agreed. I knew I had to act quickly, before this became public, before the company's name was smeared. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in my home office, drinking cold coffee and staring at the documents Morales had shown me. And I kept coming back to the same sickening question. If Valerie had done this, why? The answer came 2 days later. Chris sent me a locked folder with a text. You're not gonna like this. He was right. The log files told a different story than the paperwork. Half of the approvals made under my ID came from Valerie's laptop, while I was logged into mine across town. The IP addresses were different. The location metadata was different. She'd used my credentials, likely copied them when we worked side by side, to authorize massive payments to shell accounts. One of those accounts was tied to a consulting firm I'd never heard of, Harper Ridge Logistics. But the ownership trail led to someone I did know. Nathan Gellar, CEO of Gellar Technologies, and Valerie's longtime colleague from the tech accelerator they both mentored for. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just fraud. It was betrayal. Personal, financial, professional. Valerie had used our business, my name, and our trust to funnel money to her lover. The consulting firm was a front. The transfers were staged to make me look like the embezzler. And if Morales hadn't come early, if I hadn't acted fast, I would have been the one charged. Not her. Not Nathan. Me. I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I did something else instead. I made a backup of everything. I encrypted the logs. I made 3 copies and stored them in separate places. I called Chris and thanked him, and told him not to mention a word. And then I started watching Valerie more closely. She didn't know I knew. Not yet. That night, she came home late again. Said she'd been stuck in traffic. I asked how her day went. She said it was exhausting, and she kissed me like everything was normal. I looked into her eyes and said, "We should take a day off soon. Just us." She smiled. "Yeah, we should." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of every lie between us. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. First, I was going to collect every piece of evidence. And when the time came, I'd make sure Valerie and Nathan answered for everything. Together. I didn't sleep for the next 3 nights. Not well anyway. I'd close my eyes and see those wire transfers. The fake approvals. Her hands typing my name. Her face lying to me in my own kitchen. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the thought that I could have ended up in prison while she moved on with that smug fraud Nathan Gellar and our company's money. I kept my routine the same. If Valerie noticed anything off, she didn't show it. She still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, still asked if I wanted takeout on Wednesdays like always. The mask she wore was flawless. But now I knew it was just a mask, and I wasn't going to rip it off. I was going to let it peel slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left underneath. Chris and I worked discreetly. I gave him a prepaid phone and told him to stop using company servers for anything related to our project. He created a shadow environment, mirrored every transaction Valerie made, tracked logins, even pulled archived chat logs from our internal messaging system. Some of them were personal. Conversations between Valerie and Nathan, thinly disguised with nicknames and vague codes. Project D was me. Closing the vault was the final transfer plan. They were talking in riddles, but I understood every word. Nathan had even sent her links to legal articles on wrongful arrest settlements, like they were planning for what to do after I took the fall. It wasn't just a financial scheme. It was a full erasure plan. Remove me from the company, make it look like I burned it down, and then step in with Gellar Technologies to salvage it. They wanted to take everything. Everything I built. Everything I gave them. And smile for the cameras while doing it. I called Detective Morales anonymously. Told him to delay any charges or freezes and promised I'd deliver a full expose within a week. He wasn't thrilled, but he agreed to hold off. "You better be right," he said. "If I get pressure from above, I won't be able to stop it." I understood. I was on a deadline now. At home, I started playing the role more carefully. Made her breakfast twice. Asked her how Nathan was doing. Haven't seen him around lately. She blinked at that, but recovered quickly. "Oh, he's been traveling for work. Big West Coast expansion." I nodded like I believed her. "Good for him." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Something in her was tightening. Maybe she sensed it. Maybe she was just getting closer to the final phase. Either way, I stayed patient. I let her hang herself. Friday afternoon, she said she was going to the bank to authorize quarterly payouts. I asked which branch. She said Midtown. Chris followed her car. She went uptown, not to the bank, but to a private office suite under the name Gellar Strategic Holdings. She was in there for 90 minutes. Chris took photos, time-stamped everything, tracked phone pings. When she left, she looked calm. Too calm. That night, I opened our shared laptop, quietly, carefully, and found a folder marked contracts. Inside, a draft purchase agreement. Langston Systems would be acquired by Gellar Technologies for a grossly undervalued amount. The signatures were blank. The terms were criminal. But the buyer? Gellar's holding firm. Valerie had already prepared the paperwork to sell the company. She just needed one last thing, for me to be gone. Legally. Reputationally. Preferably charged. She didn't know Morales had already called me. She didn't know I had a copy of every transaction. She didn't know I'd spoken to a second lawyer, one that specialized in fraud and asset recovery. I printed the contracts, took photos, sent everything to my new attorney with one line. "This is what they're planning. Let's get ahead of it." Saturday morning, I told Valerie I was going to visit my sister for the weekend. "Need to clear my head," I said. She barely looked up from her phone. "You've been stressed. Take a break." "You coming with me?" I asked. She shook her head. "Too much work." "Right?" I said, watching her fingers tap a message to someone named KL. I left for the weekend, but not to see my sister. I met with Morales and handed over everything. The emails, the chats, the logs, the photos, the contracts. It filled a USB drive and 2 binders. Morales flipped through silently. "You understand," he said slowly, "that your wife and this man have committed serious federal crimes?" "I understand," I said. "And you're ready to testify?" I nodded. "Whatever it takes." He closed the binder and leaned back. This is airtight. If even half of this checks out, they're going down hard. I want immunity, I said. I didn't approve those transfers. I didn't sign anything. He nodded. With this kind of documentation, I don't see a DA who wouldn't give it to you. You'll be clear. I exhaled for the first time in days. Then let's move. That night, I sat in a hotel room and stared at the ceiling fan. I thought about every late night we spent building the company. Every time I covered for her when she was burned out or needed space. I thought about how she smiled at me like nothing was wrong while planning to ruin my life. And I thought about how close she came to pulling it off. If I hadn't asked for that audit, if Morales hadn't shown up early, I'd be wearing handcuffs right now. But not anymore. Now I had the upper hand. And they had no idea it was already over. The raid happened on a Wednesday. Fitting, really. Wednesday was payroll day, invoice day, the day Valerie always called her financial zen time. She showed up to the office in a white blazer, caramel-colored heels, phone already in hand, pretending to be too busy for conversation. I was already there, sipping coffee in the break room, nodding to employees as if nothing in the world was wrong. In a few minutes, everything would shift. But for now, I kept the mask on, just like she had. Detective Morales didn't come in guns blazing. He walked in with 2 agents from financial crimes and a quiet man in a blue suit from the state's Business Oversight Bureau. All carried briefcases and calm, cold authority. No shouting, no drama, just efficiency. Langston Systems? Morales asked at the front desk. The receptionist nodded. Here for a scheduled audit, he said. She buzzed him through. I met them halfway down the hall. Good morning, I said. They're waiting. Morales gave me a slight nod, but nothing more. They needed this to look routine, at least at first. Valerie was in the conference room, going over vendor summaries with our junior accountant, Hannah. When she saw Morales enter, she smiled automatically. Can I help you? Morales laid his badge on the table. Financial Crimes Division. We're here in connection with a fraud investigation. Valerie Langston, correct? Her face flickered. Just a micro-expression, but I saw it. Yes, that's me. What's going on? You're being placed under formal investigation for financial misconduct, misappropriation of funds, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Please step away from the computer. Silence fell like a dropped glass. Hannah backed out of the room slowly. Valerie's eyes went to me, confused, almost betrayed. Derek? What is this? I didn't say a word. Morales gestured to the agents. Let's start with a data pull and email archive. We'll need her desktop hard drive and company laptop. Valerie's voice cracked. You can't just... We have a court order, Morales said, handing her a copy. They didn't handcuff her. Not yet. But when she tried to leave, they stopped her at the door. You're not under arrest, Morales said calmly. But you are being detained for questioning. Please cooperate, and we'll get through this smoothly. I stayed outside the glass wall of the conference room. She looked out at me like I'd betrayed her. Like I was the one who destroyed us. The audacity made my hands shake in my pockets. She tried to mouth something to me, but I turned away. I went into my office and shut the door. 2 hours later, Morales joined me. We've mirrored her devices. There's enough here to proceed with full charges. The emails, the contract drafts, the shadow accounts, they all match what you gave us. What about Nathan? I asked. Already in custody, he said. Picked him up at his office an hour ago. He's not talking yet, but we found connections between his holding company and the stolen funds. I nodded slowly. Good. Morales hesitated. She's claiming she didn't understand what she was signing. That Nathan manipulated her. That you were emotionally distant and controlling, and that's why she felt pressured. I blinked once. So now I'm the villain again. Morales gave a tired smile. Don't worry. The paper trail doesn't care about feelings. The news hit the business community by the evening. Co-founder of Langston Systems under criminal investigation. That's how they phrased it. My name wasn't listed, but everyone knew. Clients started calling. Some cautiously supportive, some hesitant. I told them all the same thing. The matter is being handled by law enforcement, and the company is operating as usual. Internally, I gathered the team the next morning and spoke plainly. You've probably heard what's going on. Valerie has been placed on leave indefinitely pending legal proceedings. I want to be clear, Langston Systems isn't going anywhere. We've built something worth protecting, and I intend to do exactly that. A few employees looked shell-shocked. A couple seemed unsurprised. No one quit. Chris came into my office later with an old bottle of whiskey we'd been saving for our next big contract. "I think this counts," he said. I nodded. "Yeah, it does." We didn't celebrate. We just poured 2 glasses and sat quietly, the silence filled with something heavier than victory. It wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned. Valerie's arraignment was scheduled for the following week. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a deal, plead to lesser charges in exchange for probation and financial restitution. The DA wasn't having it. Too much money, too much deception, too many moving parts. Nathan, in a desperate move, flipped, offered to testify against her in exchange for a reduced sentence. Said she orchestrated the entire thing, played him like a pawn. I didn't believe that for a second, but I didn't care. Let them turn on each other. Let them both rot. A month later, Valerie's bail was denied due to risk of flight. She'd emptied a personal savings account days before the arrest, more evidence of intent. She was placed under house arrest pending trial, with GPS monitoring and no access to electronics. Her lawyer called me, asked if I'd be willing to issue a statement of emotional clarity to help reduce sentencing. I hung up on him. Lena and Jake, my kids, came to visit not long after. I hadn't told them everything, but news travels fast when your mother's mugshot hits social media. "Why?" Lena asked. "Why would she do this to you?" I didn't have an answer. Not a real one. "Some people think they deserve more," I said, "even when they already have everything." Jake looked at me for a long time. "You could have gone to prison." I nodded. "I know, but you didn't panic." "I didn't have time to panic," I said. "I just had to move." Lena hugged me tight. "I'm glad you did." So was I? But I wasn't done yet. There was still the matter of the company, the board, the public story, and the slow, careful rebuild of everything they tried to steal. But now I had control. The truth was out. And the people who thought I was just some naive technician were starting to realize I was a lot more dangerous than I looked. Especially when you give me a reason. I didn't rebuild Langston systems overnight. The damage they caused, financial, reputational, emotional, it all lingered like smoke after a fire. But I had one thing most people in my position don't: the truth. Documented, time-stamped, undeniable truth. That gave me leverage. And leverage, in business, is power. I started by cleaning house. Valerie's accounts were locked, her access revoked. But it went deeper than that. I brought in a forensic accountant to review every financial pathway she'd touched in the last 2 years. And that's when more came out. She'd been moving money through vendor accounts, fabricated invoices to fake firms that had no employees, no services, no presence. Just P.O. boxes and ACH routing numbers tied to Nathan's network. It wasn't just one scam. It was a web. Complex, careful, pre-planned. When the auditor was done, the damage totaled just over $470,000. More than I had imagined. The court filings were amended. The DA looked almost energized. "They wanted to ruin you," he told me. "We'll make sure they regret trying." I didn't need vengeance. I just needed them stopped. Valerie's frozen smile in those early hearings told me she still didn't think this would stick. She looked for the camera like someone waiting for a sympathetic documentary crew. Nathan, on the other hand, deflated quickly. His charm fell apart once the headlines used the word conspiracy. The moment his business partners cut ties, he started throwing Valerie under the bus like it was a sport. Meanwhile, I was working behind the scenes. I restructured the company into a new holding LLC, cutting off any future claims from joint ownership. I brought Chris in as operations lead, promoted 2 employees who had stood by me during the worst of it. I sent out a detailed client memo, transparent, calm, and legally airtight. I didn't name names. I didn't assign blame. I simply explained, a former executive misused funds. Law enforcement is involved. The company is cooperating fully and continuing operations as normal. That kind of professionalism reassures people. The phone stopped ringing with doubt and started ringing with deals again. One afternoon, 2 weeks after the hearing, I got a call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Michael Holloway, an old mentor, now VP at a major regional firm. "Saw the news," he said. "Sorry you had to go through that. I always said you were the steady one. Never took shortcuts. Looks like that paid off." "Appreciate that," I said. "We're still standing. Let me know when you're ready to scale. I've got 3 contracts coming up that might be a fit." I hung up the phone and sat in silence. That one call meant more than the new contracts. It meant I wasn't tainted. They were. I started going home earlier. Cooked real meals. Sat on the porch with a drink instead of spreadsheets. I even dusted off the old guitar Valerie used to tease me about and started playing again in the evenings. Not for anyone, just for the air and the quiet. And slowly, the house stopped feeling like a crime scene and started feeling like mine again. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope. No return address. Handwritten. I recognized the slant immediately. Valerie. The note was short. I made terrible choices. I don't expect forgiveness, but I never stopped loving you. I hope one day you'll believe that. I folded the paper once and put it in a drawer. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel anything. Just a quiet, settled finality. That door was locked. Later that week, her lawyer reached out again. She's considering a full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence and restitution payments from assets in her name, he said. She wants to make things right. She wants to avoid prison, I replied. Let the court decide what's right. I wasn't negotiating. Not for her. Not anymore. The judge denied the motion. Trial date was set for December. Nathan pled out first. 3 years minimum, restitution included, probation after release. Valerie refused to cut a deal. Either pride or delusion, I couldn't tell. Maybe both. I was called to testify. Took the stand in a packed courtroom. Laid out the timeline. Showed the log files. Verified the contracts. The jury didn't flinch. Neither did I. When the verdict came, I didn't celebrate. But I did breathe. Guilty on all counts. Maximum sentence. 8 years, with no parole before 5. Restitution ordered. All remaining assets liquidated. Valerie looked straight ahead. No tears. Just that blank, stubborn mask she always wore when she thought she still had a card to play. Only now, the deck was gone. Outside the courtroom, Morales shook my hand. You're one of the few that made it out clean, he said. I've seen better men go down for less because they didn't move fast enough. I didn't move fast, I replied. I moved quiet. He smiled. That's why you won. That night, I went home and opened a bottle of the good stuff I'd been saving. Sat on the porch with Chris and 2 cigars. To survival, he said. To never doubting your instincts again, I added. We clinked glasses. Some people think strength is loud, that it's about shouting down the storm. But I've learned real strength is silence with a purpose. It's calm when you could have exploded. It's standing still while someone tries to bury you, and letting them dig their own grave. And that's exactly what they did. After the trial, the world didn't stop. Emails still needed answering, employees still needed leadership, clients still wanted deliverables. The headlines died out within a week, pushed aside by some celebrity scandal or political circus. And just like that, what had nearly ruined me became yesterday's news. But for me, it never really left. Every time I opened a spreadsheet, signed a contract, or walked into the office, there was a shadow. Not a haunting one, but a reminder of what had been tried, of what I'd survived. I made a decision soon after Valerie's sentencing. I wasn't going to sell the company, but I wasn't going to let it own me anymore either. Langston Systems would continue, but not as the center of my identity. I gave Chris partial equity, made him official COO. I cut back my hours, hired a project director so I could focus on only the work I enjoyed. For the first time in over a decade, I could breathe without spreadsheets in my lungs. Clients noticed the change. You look different, one of them said during a quarterly call. Lighter. I didn't explain, just smiled and said, sometimes clarity does that to you. Jake and Lena started visiting more often. They didn't talk about their mother much. Lena occasionally mentioned therapy, how she was working through the resentment, but I didn't push. It wasn't my place to manage their healing. All I could do was be present, honest, and available. And I was. One Sunday morning, Jake and I sat on the back deck drinking coffee, watching the squirrels terrorize the bird feeder. He turned to me and said, "Do you think she ever really loved you?" I took a long breath. I think she loved who I was when it served her. And maybe she loved the idea of us. But not the reality. Not the grind. Not the loyalty. She liked the structure I gave her, until it reminded her she couldn't reinvent herself without burning it down. He nodded. That's pretty close to what I came to. I sipped my coffee. And it's enough for me. Lena called the next week with news. She was getting promoted. Project lead at her firm. She sounded proud, grounded. Like someone who wasn't carrying her mother's choices anymore. Before we hung up, she said, "You taught me what resilience looks like, Dad. Not by preaching. Just by not collapsing." That stayed with me. Not as a badge, but as a quiet affirmation. I hadn't always known what I was doing, but I'd stayed standing, and that counted for something. In early spring, I got an unexpected message. Karen Adler, a former client, now consulting for a tech nonprofit, asked if I'd consider speaking at an industry event on ethics in small business leadership. My first instinct was to decline. I wasn't a speaker. I was a builder. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had something to say, not just about what happened, but about how not to let betrayal define you. I stood on that stage in front of a modest crowd. No spotlights, no applause, and told the truth. About trust. About misplaced loyalty. About how it's not paranoia if they really are trying to bury you. And about how, sometimes, protecting yourself doesn't mean fighting louder. It means preparing smarter. After the talk, a few people came up to thank me, but one man in particular stuck out. Tall, mid-40s, serious eyes. "My wife and I run a firm together," he said. "Your story hit close. I think I've been ignoring some signs." I looked at him. "Trust your instincts. And don't wait for permission to protect yourself." He shook my hand hard. "Thank you." I drove home that night with the windows down. The air was clean, full of spring. It felt like a different world than the one I'd barely escaped a year before. I wasn't naive anymore. But I wasn't bitter either. And that was the real win. A few weeks later, I got word that Nathan had been transferred to a minimum security facility upstate. One of his former employees sent me a message anonymously. He's been bragging about getting out early for good behavior. Still thinks he was the victim. I didn't respond. Let him brag. Let him rot. None of that touched me now. Valerie, from what I heard, was struggling. Her assets were gone. Her reputation shot. She'd reached out to some of our old friends, but most of them never replied. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't even feel satisfaction. Just confirmation. Choices echo. And hers were still bouncing around a room she couldn't escape. One day I came home to find a padded envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a simple, handwritten letter from Valerie's sister, who I hadn't spoken to in years. It read, "I'm sorry for what she did to you. I don't know if she'll ever be the person we all believed she was, but I wanted you to know some of us still see who you are." I folded the letter, placed it in the same drawer as Valerie's note, and left it there. Not as a keepsake, as evidence that even among ruins, some people still tell the truth. And I was one of them. Langston Systems turned a profit that quarter. Not record-breaking, but clean, honest, sustainable, the way it should have always been. I took a weekend trip, first real one in years. No laptop, no emergency calls, just a hiking trail, a cabin, and my own thoughts. I came back lighter. People say time heals everything. That's not true. Time just makes the sharp edges dull enough to carry without bleeding. Healing? That comes from how you choose to live after the damage is done. And I chose peace. Not because it was easy, but because it was earned. 1 year to the day after Detective Morales walked into my office, I sat alone at the same desk with the door open, sunlight pouring across the floor, and silence that didn't feel threatening anymore. The company was stable. The case was closed. The noise was gone. And I was still here. Stronger, sharper, and above all, untouched. That morning I found a photo in an old folder while reorganizing the archive server. It was from our company's 5th anniversary. Valerie and I standing in front of the original office, arms around each other, smiling like we'd built something sacred. I stared at that version of us for a long time. I didn't feel grief, just recognition. That man had no idea how close he would come to losing everything. And that woman had already begun writing the first line of a lie. I didn't delete the photo. I didn't print it either. I just archived it again and moved on. Later that week, I met with Chris to finalize the transition of some executive duties. "You're sure you want to step back this far?" he asked. "You built this." I smiled. "That's exactly why I can afford to step back. I built it right. And now it's your turn to protect it." He didn't argue. He'd earned it. A year ago, he was the IT guy who handed me a folder that saved my life. Now he was co-owner, partner, and one of the few people I trusted without hesitation. I kept my office, but I spent less time in it. More on-site with clients. More consulting. More mentoring startups, teaching them not just how to scale, but how to safeguard against betrayal, against internal rot, against blind trust. My story became part of my credibility. People didn't pity me. They respected the way I handled it. Quiet, precise, legal, complete. One afternoon in early May, I received a letter from the Department of Corrections. A formal notification: Nathan Gellar's parole request had been denied. His earliest eligible release now set for the following year. Attached was a victim statement form, asking if I wanted to submit anything. I didn't. I had nothing more to say. He wasn't worth another word. That same month, I heard from Lena. She wrote me again, she said quietly. I didn't ask for details. What did you do? I left it on read, she replied. I don't hate her, but I'm not interested in being part of her redemption arc. I nodded. That's fair. She paused. How did you get to the point where you weren't angry anymore? I stopped seeing her as powerful, I said. I started seeing her for what she really was. Small, desperate, and scared of losing the lie she built around herself. Lena didn't say anything, but I think that helped. Summer came, and for the first time in years, I planned a real vacation. Not a long weekend. Not a work retreat disguised as rest. A real break. I rented a cabin on a lake 2 states away. Brought books. Left the laptop. Turned off notifications. On the second day, I woke up early, brewed coffee, and sat by the water watching fog roll across the glassy surface. It was so quiet I could hear the fish jump. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness without tension. Peace without performance. There were no eyes on me, no masks to wear. Just a man in his 40s, alive, free, and no longer explaining himself to ghosts. One night, sitting on that dock, I thought back to a question Jake had asked months earlier. Do you think she ever loved you? My answer hadn't changed. She might have loved me in moments. But love built on convenience isn't love. It's shelter. And when someone better offers a different kind of shelter, more exciting, more validating, that's when people like Valerie show their true shape. My mistake wasn't trusting her. It was believing her loyalty came from strength, not from need. I wouldn't make that mistake again. Back home, I found things quieter, calmer, not because there was less happening, but because my boundaries were solid. I no longer gave parts of myself to people who hadn't earned them. I answered questions directly, but I stopped defending myself to those who asked the wrong ones. I became selective with my time, and the result was clarity. Karen, one of the few who had supported me publicly after the scandal, invited me to join a small advisory board for ethical startups. We want someone who's been through fire, she said. I joined, not for the title, for the chance to tell founders the thing no one ever tells you when you launch a company with someone you love. Love is not a contract. It doesn't protect you in court, and it won't save you when signatures are forged and bank accounts drained. I spoke quietly, but people listened. One evening, after a panel, a young woman approached me and said, "You don't sound angry." That's rare. I smiled. That's because I won. She tilted her head. But she ruined your marriage, nearly ruined your business. How is that winning? I looked at her carefully. Because I'm not carrying it. She is. I have my freedom, my name, and a life I built clean. She has a number and a reputation no one wants to touch. I didn't burn her down. I just didn't let her burn me. That's the win. She nodded slowly. Makes sense. The story ended quietly. No book deal. No revenge tour. Just a man who saw what was happening, responded with precision, and walked away with everything that mattered still intact. Valerie is just a name now. Nathan is just another con who thought charm could replace substance. And me? I'm not just a survivor. I'm the man they failed to destroy. The man who saw the knife coming, stepped aside, and let gravity do the work. And I'll take that ending over fire and fury any day.